Hey everybody, I'm Ted Price from Insomniac Games. On today's episode of the Game Maker's Notebook, I chatted with Tara Saunders and Stuart Whyte, and they are the co-studio heads of London Studios. Now, while London Studios is known for their work on innovative games like SingStar and iToy and big VR titles like Blood and Truth, we spent our time talking about culture. Tara and Stuart talked at length about the values the studio has created to guide their culture and how the team puts those values into practice every single day. They shared their approach to supporting team well-being, and they explained how they've embraced and are supporting diversity inside and outside of the studio, and much more. Please join us. All right, Tara, Stuart, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ted.
Yeah, hi, Ted.
We see each other a lot. We talk a lot, and it's great to have a chance to share some of the things that we generally talk about when it comes to company culture and all of the sort of the fun development conversations that we tend to have. But before we get there, congratulations on being in your 20th year as a studio at London Studios.
I know it's quite a milestone, actually. It's we really enjoyed celebrating that this year with the team. Been here for all of that as well, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I've only been here for 5 years of that, so I'm a relative new, but it's an incredible achievement for any studio to get to that level, and particularly with the back catalogue that we've had over those years.
Definitely. And I think that this is a great chance to ask you more about how you both got into the industry, just to help our viewers and listeners understand more about you. So how did y'all start in the industry?
So, I mean, Stu's probably been in the industry longer than I have. I think, 30 years for you, Stu, isn't it?
I worked out, I think it's actually 33 now. It was 1989 I started for my sins, but yeah. I'll talk about my intro. So I was a big gamer as a teenager. Back then it was 8-bit computers. I was initially into the Sinclair ZX81, which probably won't resonate for anybody outside of the UK, and then the Amstrad CPC, which again probably no one outside of the UK would have heard of, but it was around that Commodore 64 level, and I was massively into text adventure games. If you remember the old Infocom, Magnetic Scrolls type games. And my entry into the games industry was I won a competition in a magazine called Amstrad Action, where I became the Adventurer of the Year 1989 for my encyclopedic knowledge of text-based games. And soon after, this is when text adventures, and they used to have columns in magazines with people with weird pseudonyms that would write those columns. And the guy that wrote that column for Amstrad Action resigned the following month. And the editor thought, oh my God, I've got to find someone who knows about text adventures. Where am I going to find this person? And he phoned up a 18-year-old Stuart, fresh out of school, who was just about to go to university. He was like, I'll give it a go. And yeah, I started writing and reviewing text adventures. And then after university, I got my first job as what was then called a project manager. Before producers existed, before EA kind of glamorized the term, I was a project manager at a company called Microprose, and I worked on a number of console games at Microprose. And back when teams were 3-4 people in size, which was very, very different to teams of today.
Definitely. Well, that is fascinating. Tara, what about you? How did you get started?
Yeah, so actually I joined the industry just at the launch of PlayStation 2, actually. I was kind of fresh from a master's degree in animation, so that's kind of been my background. I mean, prior to that, I did a lot of studying in kind of art design kind of subjects, so product design, industrial design, discovered graphic design and then animation as part of kind of my studies. And that really led to my career in games. I could have easily gone into film, TV. I was on one of those courses where, I think 70% of my year went into kind of film production and doing really, really well in film companies now. I kind of stepped into the game studio because I was offered a job at the BBC on the same day as the job at PlayStation. But what brought me actually into games was I kind of stepped into the studio, and I kind of saw that real blend of like art, design, technology together. And it was just that people aspect of people stood around a desk discussing a problem. And that compared to like going into like a TV studio where, people were like headphones on and working on that kind of shot as part of their narrow bit of the pipeline. I was like, do you know what? I hadn't kind of given games too much of a consideration, but I was like, this is for me. I think it's because it really had that kind of people solving problems together component.
And that led fairly soon to the formation of, or your joining London Studios, being part of the.
So actually, I joined the studio before it was called London Studio. I joined PlayStation as part of Team Soho, working on The Getaway. And what happened was Team Soho merged with Psygnosis Camden to form London Studio, and that was 20 years ago. And I've been at PlayStation 22 years, so it's my 23rd year, and so it's been in the same studio throughout its history.
So what would you say is if you could pin down the biggest change in 20 years, just narrow it to one thing, what would it be?
I'd say the culture, actually, the culture. I mean, because the technology moves at a constant pace, and it's the technology is always moving and always adjusting and updating. So you don't kind of almost don't see those changes as much. But I think team culture, especially kind of like over the last kind of 3-4 years, where really putting an emphasis onto kind of people. Mm-hmm. And that, that realization of great games are made by teams of great people. And if you really get the kind of the people piece right, then I think it leads to really great kind of creative productions. So I think that's definitely been a significant jump. But other than that, as I said, technology is and just the amount of like different elements of technology that come along, whether that be, I remember 3D first coming along, and then kind of AR games, and then VR. And then just the graphical kind of increases with each generation. Every 5-10 years, it's like you look back and think, wow, that game looks dated, but it didn't at the time.
Well, going along with that shift in culture, you all have made some really varied games. I mean, I'll share that some of my family's favorites early in London Studios' career was SingStar and iToy. Mm-hmm. We spent a ridiculous amount of time playing that series, both of those series, and then you shifted to more mature content. You went into VR. And did those shifts also affect your culture? And I'm going to dive more deeply into culture and how you all manage it. But do you think that had an effect on culture?
I'm not sure if it affected culture so much. I think if you look back across everything that we've done before, I think you'll see there's this strand of like innovation kind of in there. And so everything that we did was different, but there was this constant theme of like innovating, or whether that be innovating around, a new piece of hardware, attaching a camera to a games console, or putting a microphone into someone's hand, or having voice activated kind of gaming. each one of those games stands out for from an innovation perspective, and I think that is the key component that's just been running through London Studio through its entire history. And I think now it's about, we're working on something new at the moment, and I think we're looking at how we bring that kind of innovation of our DNA into kind of a console, just a core console game without peripherals.
Just adding to that, I mean, I can't really speak of the culture back then. I wasn't here, but I can definitely say that in the 5 years that I've been here, we've had significant inroads in kind of improving the culture and a lot more focus on culture. Because I think, going back to Tara's answer about 20 years ago, how it's changed, I think it is that people aspect has just become so much more important as teams have got bigger, game development has become more complex. That human element and kind of, ensuring that it's working well is so much more critical, and things like culture and environment and the management is just so much more critical than it ever has been. And that's, I think, a lot of our focus over the past 3 or so years that we've been doing this role, Tara, is kind of much more focused on kind of improving on those areas.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, then let's just dive right into that, because I mean, culture is at the heart of, I think, every creative endeavor. So I know that you all have studio values, and I've read interviews where you talk about how important they are. Can you share your studio values with us? And
we've got 6, and actually we should probably share some of the story of how we came up with the values, actually, because I think it's really easy to kind of sit back and have values that are top down driven, where you roll out a set of words to the team and kind of expect them to get behind them and start living them. Whereas what we did in the studio is we actually ran a series of workshops with the team, and everybody started kind of coming to those workshops with what their own individual values were. And then we would kind of look at, okay, so from those individual values, which ones do you think are ones that could roll up to become team values that, aren't just personal to you, but they're actually personal to how you would like the whole team to work. And so we just ran a series of these workshops and kept kind of funneling various groups of words down to a set of 6 core values, which we've got brave, team spirited, which I think that's one that I think is probably in the heart of every game team anyway. You can't make a game without that value. We've got empowered, inclusive, curious, and balanced. And this one was actually really, really important to the team, actually. I think we've all seen issues in the industry historically that come from, just, I think a lot of it comes from also passion. It's like when you've got really high passion, where people are working on something very creative, you can start to lose that thread of, I've actually been sat in front of a screen for way too long. And so we were actually quite proud of the team coming up with balance, and having that value allows kind of us to hold each other accountable for it, and even the team to hold me and Stuart accountable for that as well. And they do, they do call it out. When you send an email late at night, they go, "Oh, Tara, I noticed that you were sending an email late at night. Is everything all right?" And I think values are really good for that purpose, actually.
I think, yeah. I mean, for us, I think like lots of companies kind of approach values as there's a bunch of execs in a room, decide their values, and then roll them out to the team, and then maybe every couple of years they'll revisit them. But that's it. They become a tick boxing exercise. For us, by really doing it from the ground up and actually involving everyone in that journey, it just meant that the values that we created really reflected the team. The team were already living those values. We incorporate those values now as part of our interview questions when we're getting new people to join the team. And it's incredible to me how much the values just resonate constantly around the team, which is a weird thing, because most organizations I've ever worked in, they're just paid lip service and then they're ignored. But in this team, they really are lived, and it's fantastic to kind of see, even actually, not that we can talk about it at all, unfortunately, at this point, but even almost in the creative of some of the development and design stuff we're doing, we're starting to see, my God, that kind of connects to that value, which is pretty cool, because it's coming from the team, and it's reflecting what the team are, which is great.
Oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Tara.
Tim. Yeah, we had a bit of a moment actually at the end of last year. So we survey our team quite regularly to find out kind of just, just how efficient they are, how they're feeling, like their well-being, how happy they are working here, and just help kind of like ask them if they would recommend us as a place to work. And I think we kind of measure that stuff on an ongoing basis. And last year, so at the end of 2021, and we'll do it again this year because it was a really good exercise, we kind of asked the studio as part of our, monthly pulse survey in December, what was the thing that you're most proud of about, that you've over the last year? And what was really interesting there, and I didn't spot it at first, somebody else pointed it out to me, said, oh, isn't it interesting? Your team are actually talking your values back to you in terms of they were using them in the language that they were saying in terms of what they were proud of. Like whether that be, bravely choosing a new concept to deliver on. And it was really interesting to see. So we've kind of moved from them being like bedding in kind of thing to a point where they are actually lived and communicated back, that where the team used them themselves in their own communication.
Oh, that was sort of addressing the question I was going to ask you, and that is there anything you need to do to remind team members to apply the values, even if you do hear them echoed back?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the techniques that you use just to make sure it's top of mind?
I think so. Definitely not putting them up on the walls. That's not how values are lived. In fact, although it's interesting because now we do have them up on the walls, but that's 3 years after they were created. And we only did that once we were comfortable that people were actually living by them. And it's done very subtly. It'll be like, we've got a poster on the wall that says, always wear your brave pants. And, it's a fun poster, but it kind of is our value that's up there, just, in a fun way. What we did do is that we kept communicating them. We would talk about them, and we do things like we have a newsletter that we send around every month, and me, Stu, our HR lead at the time would just take a value and talk about it, and actually talk about why that value was important to us, how we saw that playing out in the team, give some examples of how people were living those values. And I think that's helped seed it in, is to not just kind of come up with them, slap them on the wall and then walk away from them. It's to actually put them in, put them even as part of your, like Stu said, the interview process, even just our end of year kind of review, performance reviews and things like that, reflect and have people kind of talk about them in the one-to-ones and things, if call out when people are living the values or not living the values. It's just keeping them fresh in people's mind, I think, through the year. Is there anything else, Stu, that you think from that perspective?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, I think it, to be honest, it's living this value so much within the studio. I've never, in my 30 years, I've never seen a studio so pure in this regard, and it's been a pleasure to kind of see the team really go with it. I'd love to say I have all the super amazing answers as to why it happened. I don't know what the flash was that made this catalyst work, but it definitely seemed to resonate. And I think, for us, Tara and myself, kind of like, that team culture is super important. And, with the advent of COVID and the hybrid, it's, the continuing challenge is how we try and keep that culture working when actually we're a much more distributed team. I think those kind of cultures and living to values is almost easier when you're kind of in one space, but definitely, like, we've got to keep pushing it and keep plugging it. And I think ongoing, our culture is going to continue to develop, and we're going to continue to have to work hard at keeping it where it is at and pushing it forward.
It definitely helped that the team were bought in from the start, because they felt like their values, not ours. It was that collaborative effort of coming up with them. Although, we've got a lot of new people in the studio, and it's not like it's now just a set of values for the old people that came in. I guess because we've hired with them in mind as well. And, you can hire, from all walks of life into those values, because the values are very kind of from the heart. They're not about looking for a set type of people. Anybody can demonstrate bravery, team spiritedness, or curiosity, but I think having them has definitely. I would encourage every studio to create them and create them in a way with your team.
Excellent advice. And I want to ask you a tactical question about that, because having gone through similar processes, I know that a challenge is editing. So for
Mm.
you, how did you whittle it down to 6 values? I imagine you had more than 6 that were proposed.
We did. We
Yeah.
actually had probably each one of those had a cluster of words that were very similar around them as well. So at the end of each, we as I said, we ran a series of workshops, and at the end of each workshop, I think actually one of the really good things we did is we took a representative from each workshop as a stakeholder group throughout the entire values process. So they were there in the workshop at the beginning, and then they were representing that group, that entire group, for the duration of every step of the values, including all the way through to the copywriter kind of, coming up and tweaking them. So I think that continuity, which meant that I think we had value champions by the end of that process. And then it was a series of copywriting. I mean, underneath each one of those words, there's a little statement that goes with it that gives a bit of depth to that value. And so some of the other things that came out of the workshops are actually embedded into the write-ups of that value. Like there's other words in there, like passion and other components that kind of fit thematically into those values.
Yeah, we definitely had quite a lot, even from the kind of like the scrum of scrums of all the people coming together representing their teams. There was a lot of kind of data and values, and kind of even with the values that were shared, like empowered came up a lot. There was a lot of language underneath it, and actually, I think, to be honest, the big thing that really helped us at the end was that copywriter. It was we were struggling with it. It was kind of like throwing over a fence, giving it to a copywriter, getting them to play with it, come back to us, and then yeah, that's kind of there, but we need to make some tweaks. And that iteration with someone who was an actual wordsmith rather than ourselves trying to kind of finalize it, I think really helped polish it and make it where it is now.
Oh, that's great advice for any team that's embarking on this. And I want, Stuart, you mentioned empowered, and that is one that really stood out to me because I'm interested in understanding how you apply that and really what it means specifically to London studios.
I think, it's one we're still very much kind of developing and growing. We're in the early stages of development on our next title, and having larger teams, you can't have just a small number of people who are the decision makers. It's too much on any one individual, and actually, people do their best work when they are empowered, when they feel they can take responsibility and they can be accountable for the work that they're doing. So we want to encourage as much as possible. Like we set very high level kind of direction. We set goals as to where we want to be at the end of this fiscal year, at the end of 5 years time or whatever. But actually within that, we want to give a lot of latitude for people to be creative within that and actually feel that they can own their own approach. And that to us, I think, is really where empowerment comes from. Tara, do you have any kind of further?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's written underneath this value, we talk actually in the little blurb that we have, that it also is about kind of owning our own successes and failures. And I think we actually were very keen to put the word failure in there because I think sometimes, culturally, when people fail, fingers get pointed and people get blamed and whatever. But actually, success only comes from failure. You learn from making mistakes. You learn from trying something, and then you'll find a nugget of something else through that activity of just trying something. And I guess it kind of relates back to brave. We want the team to feel brave and to feel that they can kind of have an idea for something, go and explore it, and then bring it back and share their learnings with the team about what worked with it and what didn't work. But I do think this is one that's a constant work in progress, because I think there's a fine balance between kind of being hands off and letting the team just run with it, and then you kind of, it's really hard. Everybody's kind of going in slightly different directions. You've got to keep bringing them back into the fold, and I think we're still working on that balance of where does empowerment mean that there's enough guidance to make sure that everyone's swimming in the same direction. But yeah, still, it's a difficult balance to get right when you've got a creative project, I think.
Well, that leads to another question about the word you said, and that's accountability. I mean, with empowerment, right? What are some of the mechanisms you use just to ensure that When people are saying, I got this, I'm, and you say, great, go for it, run with it, that things are actually getting done, and people, the team is staying cohesive. How do you do that? What are some of the things that you as leaders help with?
I think regular check-ins. I think, one-to-ones with people can never be underrated. But also, I think kind of like team show and tells and things like that, that kind of just get the team also to own their own work and showcase it to the rest of the team themselves, rather than us presenting everyone's work back down to them. We try and encourage the team to share their own work, talk about their own work directly, so that then if people do have feedback and comments on it, they're seeing that and hearing that live. I don't know. I don't think there's any right or wrong model for this, and I think it changes as the team ebbs and flows throughout the different stages of development as well. I think at times you need more standing back and space for people to be creative, and at times needs to be very focused, and it needs to be very channeled, and it needs to be everybody on exactly the same path to get there. And I think working out the right time to step forward and the right time to step back I think that's something that we're probably learning and also making mistakes from all the time. Is like we didn't get that quite right. The team's gone off and we haven't quite hit the milestones that we wanted to at the time that we wanted to. And so then it's about kind of like, just stepping in. But also I still think for me it's all about empowering our leadership team and our line manager team to own their own deliverables and even coming up with the task lists and stuff themselves. I'd never want to be in that position where we're a team that gives a checklist. You must do, this is what we need by the end of the month, and not leaving scope for the team to just kind of have an experiment and a play, because I think that's where a lot of the innovation has happened in the past, is when you step back a little bit, give some space, and suddenly there's this thing that we didn't even know, we didn't even have that down on the list of things to do, but that's amazing, and that's changed and leveled the game up significantly.
I think on that as well, part of that kind of improving accountability is connected around just building an environment where people can feel trusted and where we can trust each other, and part of that, it comes down to honesty and communications, and going back to that, fear of not failing or failing. There's no we can't just get to great overnight. We have to iterate to get there, and it starts off not so great and takes time to get to great. And that trust and accountability is something that ongoing, I think, is something that's very much part of the culture, but like all of our values, we have to keep working on.
That's fantastic that you all do that. It sounds like you're also very transparent about pretty much everything that goes on. Is transparency?
Absolutely. I think that's, when you talked before about kind of like biggest shift, I would say that actually that is a huge shift that's happened that has affected the culture. Just, whatever's going wrong, when things are going really bad, just being honest about the fact that they're going bad, and working with the team in an open, honest way. We seek feedback all the time, actually, and give different forums. Like some people still need, like a forum where they can not leave their name. But this pulse survey that we do every month, what's been really interesting actually is seeing, as we kept doing that and as we were reacting to feedback from that survey and actually reaching out and talking and following up with people who had left feedback, is that at first it was completely anonymous, and then it was like we were like, right, we're going to put the option of you to put your discipline in, so at least then we were tracking trends, whether there was a problem just related to a specific discipline, because sometimes when you get feedback you're like, is that an individual feedback, is like affecting the whole team, and being able to track it into kind of trends around whether the issue was in one discipline or another discipline or just across the whole team. And then we encourage people to leave their name, and seeing that we actually track the curve of it as well. Like seeing at the beginning it was like next to no one would leave the name, and now kind of I would say 60% of the studio do, and that's been really good, because sometimes we've talked to the team about this is if we get difficult feedback in the survey, and actually we were reading, actually this person needs some support or needs some help, and without there being a name in there, we weren't able to kind of offer and go in and target that help. So we were kind of almost talking to everyone. And at sometimes it's relevant to talk to everyone, and other times it's, if somebody's got a deep problem, you kind of just want to go in and work with them on fixing it. So that's really, the pulse survey has been really good actually for us to see what's working, see what's not working, and be able to do follow-up on those things.
Has there been anything that surprised you just when those surveys come back, or do you always have an inkling of what is happening, and then this is validation for what's happening? I ask this because we do surveys as well, and sometimes it's always like opening Christmas presents. You just don't know what you're going to get, and sometimes it's great.
Yeah,
sometimes
I think sometimes there are definitely surprises in there, and I think maybe my lens on it is different now, because I think I used to pick up a lot just through osmosis of being in the studio, and you would get a rumble of problems going on through, just through the movement of people around screens, through the pitch of the conversation. And actually, I really struggled through the pandemic, actually, when it was like everyone was stuck at home, and I was like, I don't have a sense of how things are going. And actually, which was actually why we did kick off things like the pulse survey, because we're like, I don't have a sense. I don't have that osmosis of just being in the environment with the team and seeing, just as you glance across the studio, you kind of get a vibe. I've got a natural super skill for reading body language and stuff like that. So it's like it was like a big loss to me to go to like working from home on my own and then not being able to get a read of the team through just the energy that was in the room. And the pulse surveys actually really helped with that. So yes, there are still some curveballs in there, but I think I've dialed down my expectations, because we're not as in the studio altogether as we used to be. And so I'm kind of using, I know really the pulse survey is a big indicator for me for that team vibe.
Yeah,
Well,
I was going to say,
Go
even with town halls and big team meetings, we really felt that, didn't we, Tara? I think particularly earlier on, before the team started to discover the emoji buttons, which now they're just constant emojis as we're presenting. But just the lack of, when you're presenting to a live room and you're presenting to a dev studio, you can get that feedback. You can kind of see what's landing or what's not landing. It's very hard to do over a Teams call. Yeah, so getting that.
It is. I'll share that I recall a lot of the big team meetings we would have in person, and looking out at just impassive stone faces and going, is this going well? I actually have sort of the opposite experience now in Zoom calls, because it's easier to switch back and forth between people and see expressions, because you can notice when an expression changes. Anyway, that's just me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's good. That's just a good showcase of how we're all different, isn't it? I think
It
like
is.
I
Yeah.
definitely pick up a lot of kind of social cues and indicators from body language and atmosphere in the room, and I think that's just been my background, upbringing, whatever. It's like you're always just on the watch.
Yes. Well, I think it's great that you both have brought up the move to sort of a new reality post-pandemic. And what really has this meant for work for the studios? Are you fully remote? Are you hybrid? What's happening at London Studios?
So we're hybrid. We have, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10% of staff who are fully remote. A couple of whom are actually in some different countries. Actually, now we've got someone in Canada and someone in Italy and Spain. But we still have a base. We still have our central hub in the heart of London. But we've done a lot of work on kind of refocusing that space. And Tara, actually, you've been kind of driving a lot of that, kind of almost changing how we think of the office going forward.
Yeah, I think we definitely probably, going back probably a year when we were really reviewing how we were going to work. We had a little bit of remote working already before the pandemic hit, so it wasn't a complete alien thing. I think what did happen is that the people who were remote suddenly were like, oh my goodness, this is now brilliant, because it's like, I think they did used to get a little bit kind of almost left out of things, and it wasn't something that we thought about. Now we're as Stu said, we're fully kind of like hybrid, which I think is a difficult model to do. It's like it's much easier to have a lane and swim in either lane of like either digital first or, you know, fully everybody in the studio. I think hybrid takes a lot more effort to kind of do. But one of the things that we did think about is that, you know, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to change the studio space. We had a sea of empty desks. And we were thinking, like, when the team come in, how are they going to be wanting to spend their time? And a lot of it was social interactions or reviews, group working. So we actually cleared a large section of the floor that we had, took all of the desks out, and put in these what we call collaboration spaces, which were just groups of sofas with a TV on a stand and, you know, some nice furniture that gave some soft breaking up of those spaces. And it's interesting, we now have people coming in. We have some people who are based in the office full time as well, but we have some people come in and use hot desks, and some people just come in and use the collaboration space and sit down and, you know, get around a Miro board or get around the game, or, you know, playing another game for reference or whatever. And doing those things in the social space, in the collaboration space. The studio become more of like a coffee shop from that perspective than, you know, a focused working environment.
I think your early mood boards for that space were swanky coffee shops, right, Tara? It's definitely got that
I think so, yeah.
that vibe.
Yeah. But to be honest, I've always, you know, if I was doing a studio from scratch now, like for me, I've always got this firm belief that we make games for people's living rooms, right? We work on entertainment for the home. And so for me, I never want a cold, boring office. I want it to feel homely, like walking into somebody's living room. And I've always applied that to any of the decoration that we do in the studio. So you walk in now, and the furniture isn't what you find in office furniture stores. It's, you know, a lot of it's from retail stores. It's bookcases that you would find in my home as much as you would find, you know, anywhere else. And it makes an impact. It makes the studio feel warm and welcoming, actually.
That sounds wonderful that you do that.
Yeah.
What do you give everybody the sort of open option at all times to be hybrid if they want to just come in 1, 2 day, 3, 4, or 5 days a week? How do you manage that just tactically? That sounds really difficult.
Yeah. So we
is.
were in. Oh, sorry. Go on, Tara.
No, I was just going to say it is a challenge, and I still think we're monitoring to see kind of like what the cadence is, because we get moments where either everybody's in and nobody's in, and so you can come into the studio on one day and it's like tumbleweeds floating around, or you hit the scenario where there's not enough space for people to do what they want to do. And so there's definitely been kind of like some need for mind shifting in terms of like when you go in, you know, you shouldn't see going in as like focused work. Focused work is done wherever you do that best, whether that be in the office or at home. But yeah, I mean, Stu, I mean, you've probably got some thoughts on this as well, because we're still in adjustment mode, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's all one big trial, right? I think fundamentally, kind of one big experiment. I mean, it feels like it would be very unlikely for us all to ever go back to the office full time. I'm not actually sure if we'd all fit at this point, but we need to continue to try and look at ways of improving hybrid, and like we didn't want to mandate you got to come in 2 days a week. We didn't want to force anybody, and people have different cadences. But what we did do is give a lot of guidelines on the sort of things that we would expect people to come into the office for. So, you know, if you're going to be spending half day doing a planning meeting or half day reviewing a build with some other colleagues, like those sorts of things are just much better face to face. And that's why we kind of set up those collab zones so that people can do that. There's you know, you have a new starter, you know, it's good to kind of onboard them in the office, get them to get the feel of the place rather than just having them sit at home, unless they're a remote worker, in which case it's fine. But I think like the majority of our team is striking up a pretty healthy balance. And then we do things like we used to do them way before the pandemic as well. We used to have monthly lunches where once a month we'd kind of try and get everybody to come together for a catered lunch, because we don't really have any kind of kitchen or catering facilities in our studio as such. And we've now continued them. We started them again June this year, and actually they've been a real catalyst for kind of driving people in. It's just people want to spend time with each other, but people also love the fact they don't have to commute an hour and a half into the office and can work from home. And it's there's definitely pros and cons for people being fully remote or fully in the office, and hybrid, although it is definitely more complicated, I think can if done right can kind of tick the pluses on both those boxes.
Mm. I think it's an interesting. I mean, we are a central London studio, so everybody commutes into the centre of the city and has quite big, lengthy, and costly commutes to get in. So I think, for us, kind of forcing everyone back to the studio just wouldn't work. I think it's just, people were quite frustrated by travel pre-pandemic, and I think what we've seen, going back to our values actually as well, is when we think about balance. Actually, balance. When we talk about balance at a studio, we want people to be good family members as well as good game developers. Because if you're not happy at home, if you're dedicating all of your time to work and you're not happy at home, that comes back and plays itself back into the work environment in some way, shape or form. Someone's not as focused, or they're having issues or whatever. So we have, because we've got the value of balance, we're trying to look at that. What does that mean from a work environment perspective? And for us, that means, not forcing people back into a studio where they're not seeing their kids from Monday to Friday. Because I don't think that's good for them, especially when they're young. It's like you've got to build those bonds. So I think it is unique to where your studio is located, and there's no cookie cutter kind of model of what's right or what's wrong. And I think we've almost accepted that there's going to be some overhead for us as a leadership team, because everything that you do, you're having to put it through the lens of this has to work for those people that are remote, those people that are working hybrid, and those people that are based in the office. And it takes a lot more kind of thought process and thinking to run everything that you do through those three different lenses.
That makes sense. But it is still wonderful to hear that you believe in ultimate flexibility. I mean, to me, that's what it sounds like. And also, I think you're alluding to the fact that, Stuart, you said this, it's unlikely things will go back to the way they were prior to the pandemic. So what are a few other things that you think will never go back to how they were pre-pandemic?
I think, so one thing for me is how kind of ideation kind of works, especially with some of the tools that we now have available that we discovered during the pandemic, like Miro, for example. I would say that our new concept is a lot richer in terms of its ideation, because it wasn't limited to the fact that there was 8 people that would fit into the room or whatever number. So people were able to contribute to the early ideas of a project asynchronously through using tools, online collaboration tools. People can see, there's a lot more visibility, I think, to the information as well through that, which allows people to consider, give feedback, even if they're not kind of in the core heart of the direction team that is driving the overarching creative. They can kind of see it a lot more visibly and sharing it and comment and give feedback. So again, that inclusive value that we've got is lived very much through the tools that we use and how we go about the ideation in terms of opening boards up, say, look, here's an early thoughts on our system design, go in, have a look and give feedback.
Yeah, I think, Tara kind of talked to it there, that we used to be synchronous. We used to have a team meeting in the office, and if 4 people were on holiday that day, well, they pretty much missed out, unless it was a really important team meeting when you'd then organize a follow-up the next Tuesday to meet with those 4, but it was never the same. Kind of what this move to hybrid, with the move to the pushing us out of the office, having meetings over video conference and being able to record them and just allowing people who have busy lives. I think we've seen a lot more flexibility come up around that balance value, as well as people have to adjust to walking a dog or taking the kids somewhere or whatever. And we're much more mindful that we do have core hours that we ask people to be available in, because otherwise it would be near nightmarish to schedule any meetings. But fundamentally within that, we want to try and make sure that there still is as flexibility as possible, so people can take holiday and still not miss out on seeing what a team meeting was, because there's now a recording of it, because we now use that tech.
Those are great changes. I vote for them. We embrace them as well, and it's really nice to see the development industry benefiting from what was a pretty challenging time, but I think we've come out of it with better practices. You all talk about these things very naturally. I mean, you've been leaders for a long time. This is what you swim in. But I'm sure at one point when you were transitioning from being content creators, I mean, Tara, you as an animator, Stuart, you writing for magazines, what was the most difficult part about that transition? I ask you this because there are probably people listening who are thinking about making the transition from content creator into a leadership position. So what do you remember was challenging?
I think, so for me, and some of it is self-expectations as well, is almost, that thought process that you think that you need to have all of the answers. And I think when I made that transition, it's very different to go to being a specialist kind of animator, sat headphones on, creating kind of scenes, to even the first time going to like leading a team of, the cinematics team on the sequel of The Getaway. It was like, okay, so I'm not doing the doing, and it's the kind of the communication that you have to grow and learn from to actually empower again other people to do the doing, but yeah, giving the good feedback along the way. What about yourself, Stu?
I think for me it was kind of having a view as to kind of what managers and leaders did, and then almost pretending to tick the boxes of that view without actually really understanding what it was, and therefore not delivering on it properly or correctly. And the realization, which has taken a long time, of actually the best thing to do is just be true to yourself and be authentic as a leader and as yourself, rather than try and pretend to be something else.
I also think there's something on like almost like not creating your own barriers. I think quite often, when you think that you have this high expectation, you're now, okay, you're leading and all of the team is looking at you, to kind of like, have all of the solutions, is if you stay in that mindset of thinking like that, rather than breaking it down and just being honest with the team, is and saying almost like, I don't have the answer to this, but let's try and work through it together. Like, what do you think? And quite often somebody comes to you with an answer for, looking for an answer on something, but actually they've got the answer themselves. And it's more, that was a big learning curve for me, is actually, okay, they're coming to me for an answer, but they do actually have a preference, or they have a view on what we should do. And I think learning that language that kind of stops me saying, being that kind of almost directive down, and actually empowering them to come up with the solution, that was a big step for me, and one that I had to get over in my own head as well, I think.
I love hearing that. I totally agree with you. It's so easy to suggest solutions because a lot of us are wired that way, especially if we were playing games as younger people and then we make games. So yeah, stepping back and allowing people to come up with their own solutions is a wonderful tool. And so speaking of tools, for your up and coming leaders, what do you do to prepare them to enter leadership roles?
So sorry, Stu, you go.
I was going to say, well, so we've put quite a lot of investment into kind of training and development of our people managers, both the kind of the ones that were already people managers, but also new people managers. And we want to ensure particularly with new people managers, that they have a lot of support. Typically, we try not to throw people in at the deep end with lots of direct reports or lots of more challenging reports. We try and break them in gently, give them a lot of support. We help some of our new leaders who have definitely got some development areas with coaching and mentoring to kind of further develop them, and just kind of create. When we had our first set of management offsite training for the team, we kind of created a sub team, a kind of and that team can rely on each other and kind of talk with each other. So we have monthly
Kind of
management
building a
meetings, relatively informal, where we want to just encourage people to be sharing and talk with each other. So it's kind of really trying to build that environment of it's okay to work with other people and talk to other people about how they're developing and growing.
I was going to say, Stu, I think that's one of the strongest things that came out of our leadership, our line manager kind of training, actually, was building them as a community of people together. And they have their Slack channel where somebody will put in a query and their team will answer it themselves again. So it's not us doing it all. It's encouraging people to support each other and grow each other, because there's a huge breadth of experience even within our kind of management team. So we've got some new managers, some seasoned managers, and that, having the seasoned managers support the new entry people into that role, or just sharing ideas and giving them the space in the forum to do that.
That's a great idea. I love hearing that.
We also have embedded HR within the studio, which is actually very relatively recently for London Studio. We had kind of external PlayStation HR for the longest time, but actually having a HR team within the studio and really focusing on the people side, understanding where development issues are and helping to be there for managers who are struggling with, how do I have this awkward conversation with this employee about blah, has been really beneficial and further help kind of level up our manager team. And actually, like when I joined PlayStation London Studio 5 years ago, I don't think our management structure was that stellar. But we recently became one of the winners of the GamesIndustry.biz Best Place to Work, and I was really, really pleased to see that I have trust in my line manager. Like scored 97% from the anonymous survey that was sent to the team, and it was just lovely to see that we've turned it around and actually people feel that their line managers, well, they know their line managers care about them, care about their career history, care about the work that they're doing, and care about making sure they have an environment where they can do great work. And that's definitely part of kind of the journey that we've been on, of really trying to grow and develop our line managers, because fundamentally where people is so important, good management is critical to that.
What are some of the things that you ask your managers to do specifically to show that they care?
Think of people as individuals and not work transactions. I think that's been a huge thing. And again, kind of putting activity on that encourages the building of relationships like that. Because it can get very transactional. I think especially actually since the pandemic, I think, work is very, people having those interactions, that the coffee machine moments and stuff like that kind of went out the window overnight, which was where a lot of the relationship building happened. Or even just wandering through a studio from one meeting room to another, and the desks that you pass and the, hey, hi, oh, that looks cool. All of that stuff kind of went. And so we tried to put in place some things to kind of capture that, whether that be a coffee machine Slack channel that people would even say, I'm going for a coffee, anybody else want to come, and then they'd literally go off to the kitchens, make coffee, and then have a few sips of coffee together. But I think you have to have those kind of personal moments dotted through the work momentum, because if not, it just is like people sharing work transactional pieces, and then they forget that underneath there's a human. And each of us will, life is complicated, as we've seen over the last couple of years. But if you're building your managers to think of the human underneath the work that's going on, then that it empowers the whole team to be better as a unit together.
I think another area where we've really leveled up on the caring front, and again, it kind of came out of the pandemic, was a lot more, not just the pandemic, just the wider society and what's been happening in the world, but a lot more focus on mental health and mental health support, and open talking about mental health, and working with mental health professionals to kind of give classes to the team on various aspects. And I think, like, I want to say almost 15% of the team are actually now trained as mental health first aiders, and kind of just being just so much more mindful about that area has just helped people, deal with the ongoing struggles of whether that be childcare in the middle of pandemic or whatever. And it's been super helpful.
Well, that leads to another big topic, and that's just well-being in general of teams. And along with mental health, and it sounds like you're helping everybody be aware and well educated on how to maintain one's mental health. How do you prevent burnout? What are some of the approaches that you use to keep the team energized and balanced?
I think our value helps with that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Yes.
we're able to point people to when, people do notice when people are working kind of out of hours, and, it only takes one person to do it. And then it's kind of like, you can see the ripple effect of those things. Although, because we do have elements of flexible working, and balance is also about, if somebody really does have to support kind of childcare, like, and this is a big one for me, like as a woman in the industry, I think, we've seen a lot of women leave the industry because they are the primary childcare givers. So, like, I want my team to feel supported, that they can be a good father and support their partner, who may also like want to have a career, etc. So I think, flexible working needs to kind of be monitored in a way, and especially if you're doing kind of work from home and those kind of things as well, you need to ensure that, if somebody's working late at night, it's not just going, oh, you shouldn't be working. It's actually going, actually, why are you working, and kind of digging into the why. And the number of times when I've kind of gone down that route, it's like, oh, because I'm really into what I'm doing, and it's like, and I think that's a big problem for games and burnout and and just crunch culture, all of that. It's because at the heart of this, we're making these amazing products that people really enjoy making, and I think you've got to monitor, and ask that question of why are you doing it, and get to the hub of, if it's about passion, you've still got to manage and help manage that individual's passion, because you don't want them burning out over time because they're putting in their extra hour or two every night because they love what they do. So I think it's just, it's asking the why. It's watching the team patterns and asking why these things are happening.
It's a tough balance. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we want to drive building high performance teams, and teams that make great games and have great fun and enjoy it while they're doing it. But we've got to be really careful of kind of not pushing it too far, because as soon as you start getting into that burnout territory, then you're not a high performing team. You're burnt out, and that is something that we need to keep a close eye on. It's a lot harder to spot actually nowadays. It used to be a lot more visible when we were in the studios, and I think that's where kind of improving the trust, improving the transparency, improving the kind of the culture of, it's okay to say I'm not feeling okay, because without that kind of work that we've done, it would be so easy for us to potentially even miss people who are really struggling, because I mean, actually, a good example of that is really early on in the transition. We found that a lot of our team were just not using webcams, and there's no mandatory requirement to use webcams, but we also found that just from a people interaction point of view, so, I mean, like, Tara's superpower is reading body language. I'm terrible at it, but even with that, being able to kind of see who you're talking to, being able to see their reaction is important, I think. And we've definitely seen within the team, and pretty much everyone uses webcams now, unless they've got a bad hair day or whatever. But yeah, it's about making sure that you're keeping an eye out for those warning signs that people aren't pushing themselves to the point that they are burning out.
That is excellent advice. So, you all are both totally in sync. I mean, it's really wonderful hearing you talk about the same things in very similar ways. As co-studio heads, how do you avoid stepping on each other's toes?
We don't
It's a good
always.
question. No.
Yeah. Particularly myself, I'm quite more brash, fire it out there. Tara's much more considered, so I end up winding up Tara no end at times when I do that. And I think it's at the heart of it, it's really good, honest communication. It's being mindful of each other. We have kind of set lanes that we're in. My background is very much production, so I'm covering the production engineering side of the business. Tara's through her background much more on the creative side, but actually, like, it's also super beneficial. Like, Tara was ill with COVID a couple of weeks ago, right? If you're a single studio head and you're off for a week, that's horrific, and it's a lot of stress. But knowing that other person is there to kind of cover is super helpful. But also, like, because our brains are wired very differently. I think Tara refers to it as left brain, right brain, and it means that we get to tackle problems together from very different angles. And I think majority of the time, the outcome of that is a far better solution than probably either of us would have come up with individually.
I'd agree with that. I think
we just recently got a office that we share together when we're in the office, right, Tara, to make sure we're totally in sync.
Yeah. No, I think Stu said something important there. I think you end up making smarter solutions and better decisions, like coming up with smarter solutions and better decisions, because you've got this well-rounded view that takes in very different personalities, perspectives, and background into it. So I think that's good. I also think it does help encourage like a collaborative culture down into the team as well, because we're doing it and we're kind of showcasing that to everyone, else. I think it helps that we kind of sit down and create goals together as well. And I think you have to be quite clear on roles and responsibilities. I think probably if we go back to right at the beginning when we first did this, I think there probably was confusion about, who does what, or who do I go to for what. And I think it takes time to embed that kind of down into the team. Something Stu was touching on there is like when you do wind each other up, which will happen for sure. I think you've got to be prepared to give each other really difficult feedback as well with that, rather than letting it sit and build and brew. You kind of have to instead go, hey, that thing, this is how it made me feel. And I think I should have picked that up, or you just have to be open, I think, about where it's working and where it's not working. And I think although we do end up with, I think, better decisions at the end of it, I think you have to acknowledge that it's slower, because we've got to get in sync with things as well. Like, Stu could run a million miles an hour down the road and have made all of the decisions, but if he hasn't kind of brought me on board with that, or the other way around, right? It's yeah. So that collaboration and getting together and discussing it kind of does probably make it a little bit slower to everyone else, but maybe it means that we're not going to flip-flop on it, because we've actually really well considered it as well, and it's going to roll out better.
Quality, not quickness.
Totally.
Yeah. I think one thing that I'm learning as well, because I'd say, we've been doing it for like 18 months, 2 years, I think. I've even lost track of time, but 2 years, I'd say that. I think you're going to have to sit down and review it every so often as well, and be open to doing that, and re-looking at, are we both applying the right value that we can add in the right places? And I think we're probably in that zone at the moment, that the team is growing at the moment, and we're really looking at things like the org dev. Like, we have to look at ourselves and our roles and our responsibilities as part of that. And then we probably don't do this enough, but I think like just checking in and asking whether we're doing the things that we actually enjoy doing. We probably need to do that and keep doing that and keeping that front of mind, because we've both got to ensure that we're both happy in our jobs as well. And you know, I think Stu said at the beginning of this that there's pros and cons to it, right? And I think one of the cons could be that, are we both growing in the same way? Because, you know, we've got each other and we can easily drift into our own comfort zones with things. And I think if you are the single figurehead, you kind of got to tackle all problems that are thrown at you. Whereas, you know, we're kind of often being thrown the things that we're comfortable with. And I think that's something that we just have to bear in mind and make sure that, you know, we are still getting out of it those career growth aspects that are you know, will be important to us both, I'm sure.
To me, that's a really strong endorsement for sharing leadership responsibilities. So thank you for explaining that. I'd love to dive into just one more big topic, and this builds off something you said earlier, Tara, and that is, you mentioned inclusion. And I know that diversity is really important to you as a studio, and I would love to know what you all do to make a difference when it comes to increasing diversity at London Studios.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good. I think everybody's looking at this at the moment. I think, again, like when I think about big shifts in the industry kind of over the last couple of years, I think people have been a lot more awakened to the power of inclusivity within a team and the importance of diversity and how diverse teams make better product. I think there's been lots of studies kind of around, you know, if you've got diverse teams, you see successful companies. I think it's worth acknowledging as well that I think some of the issues are really deep rooted. I think, you know, if you do a quick look across the entire global games industry, you probably find out that we're predominantly white male and middle class. And I think it's worth talking about that middle class aspect, because I think it's quite often the under considered aspect of diversity. Diversity isn't just about gender. It isn't just about race. It's actually about socioeconomic diversity as well. And, you know, we're a central London studio where there's a lot of really low income kind of areas around, even where the studio is based. There's high income. It's like next to each other, super high income and super low income. And, you know, our goal and ambition, I guess, would be that London studio ultimately in the long term has the diversity and richness that London has. You know, it's very multicultural. We're not there yet. We've got a long way to go still. But I do think it's been good over the last kind of couple of years to actually put a focus and emphasis on it. And I think we're starting to see, you know, it takes time to seed this. It's like you've got to plant some seeds and then they've got to grow, and you see the impact of the changes that you make, not in the first month, 3 months, 6 months. It can sometimes take a year, 18 months to start to see the diversity change. But I do think one thing, and hats off to our HR business partner, B, who's actually at Santa Monica studio now. She's recently transferred. But she came up with this really good idea when we were doing our kind of, everyone was working on their goals. And she came up with this idea that everyone should have a diversity goal. And it's one of the best things that we've done, because diversity shouldn't be being fixed by the underrepresented groups. Everybody has to take a stake in it. It won't fix unless everybody's thinking about it. And I think what she did with that move is seed that it needs to be on everybody's agenda, and just highlighting you will have a diversity goal as part of your kind of set of studio goals. And, you know, it could be something as simple as going out and doing a talk to you know, as part of a, you know, to an to a school that's got high diversity. It could be, you know, reading a book and educating yourself on, you know, the issues that, you know, complexities of some of the diversity issues. And I think we've seen the team do that, and I think everybody's much more aware and knowledgeable of the mission that we're on, because they've had their own goal as part of it.
Yeah, I think those diversity goals have made a big, big difference within the team. I think we've had really great success on the recruitment front when we first started pushing the desire to want to become more diverse as a team, because it makes us stronger as a team. we definitely got pushback from some hiring managers about, oh, it's going to take longer, or we're not going to try and searching in the real lead positions because there's so little diversity there. We're just going to be really hampering ourselves. And there was that perception at first, and then it changed very rapidly when actually we landed a couple of really fantastic candidates that we probably wouldn't have seen before. And it's come about from opening up our networks so that we can get access to more underrepresented groups by partnering with various companies in that area, doing things like running our job specs through gender neutral and through software to ensure that we kind of it reads in a way that works for everyone. And I think it's starting to pay off now. And it's not just in our recruitment. It's not just within kind of the people side of the team. It also has to manifest itself in the software that we make as well. If our next game is full of just white middle-aged men, that's not going to be good. So, and it's definitely it's through all levels of recruitment, work, and the games that we make.
So it's fantastic to hear about your dedication to diversity within the studio. Do you also support organizations outside of the studio?
Yeah, we've got a couple of partnerships with some really good charities that we've loved supporting. Actually, I mean, Stu, you're on the board of one of them. Do you want to talk about that one?
My diversity goal was to join the board, an advisory board of a charity called Urban Synergy, which is this fantastic UK London-based charity where it takes kids from inner city schools and kind of gets them mentored by people from various different industries to kind of level themselves up and help improve kind of diversity in education, which is great, because I've always felt that was kind of a key area that we could do better in, is kind of driving that forward. And we also have a connection with another group who are actually hopefully going to be feeding into some of our intern programs called Coding Black Females, who again have been inspirational. And I think we're going to partner with them on even doing a hackathon as well. So we want to kind of connect with those types of organizations to help improve the diversity of the kind of the candidates we get through. We've just last month launched, after 20 years, our first ever intern program, which is we're sifting through the thousands of CVs that we received, with the aim to starting it in January, which is super exciting.
I think that's an interesting one, isn't it, Stu? Because touching on that socioeconomic diversity again is, the intern program is specifically kind of written in a way that you don't have to have any kind of like games industry experience, and you don't have to have come from an education kind of route. It really is trying to open up and find talent that maybe can't afford to go to university, or maybe has been kind of squirreled away at home trying to learn kind of game dev on their own, and just doesn't have the network to get into the industry. And rather than kind of like all bringing in our friends or bringing in our connections, it's like just a blanket, go out wide and get people to apply and have a very fair kind of review of everybody's kind of CV from that, regardless of their backgrounds. So we're really looking forward to seeing how those things kind of really affect our longer term diversity. But we're in this for a long term play, not a short term objective. And I think also our view is that in doing this, if it helps the industry as a whole, that will come back to us again in the future. It's like, if we can seed them in, and even if in the intern program that we don't get to convert them at the end to, I'm hoping that we do, but it doesn't always work out. You don't get to convert every role because of sometimes there's headcount, or sometimes you don't have the right role available. But our idea is to keep that intern program running each year, even if it's seeding people elsewhere across wider PlayStation, across into the industry. Because if we're helping to make the industry more diverse, we will see that and build a better pool for us anyway.
That's wonderful to hear, and kudos to you all for making those efforts. And I hope everybody's listening is being inspired by what you're saying and the efforts that you're making, because we all need to contribute.
It takes.
So I was going to say another thing. I think Tara mentioned B earlier, who's just moved to Santa Monica Studios. I think part of the thing I love about London Studio as well is there's a number of people at PlayStation that started their careers at London Studio, and it's lovely to kind of be almost an incubator to helping talent go to the wider business. So, Nico, who's the studio head at Team Asobi, he's ex-London Studio. Dominic Robiliard at Pixel Opus is ex-London Studio, and there's a number more that have just kind of, it's been around for a long time, and it's great just to see talent grow and develop.
Well, speaking of growth, and this is just sort of as we end our conversation here, as you all grow, what do you see as both a big challenge and a big opportunity for you?
Whoa.
I think challenge-wise, I think we haven't gone through full game production yet during pandemic in terms of releasing something. And I still think we're still trying to define what our beat is as a studio and making sure that quality is still at the heart of everything we do while trying to deliver a really flexible way of working. And I think that's going to be a challenge for us, because I think it requires us to look at everything. How we're doing, but we've already talked about some things like the studio environment, the tools that we use, how we set up meetings and all sorts of things. I think we'll have to work through a lot to get to a really successful place with that. And I still think it's a bit of an unknown.
I think for me the biggest challenge ahead is and channeling the Studio Brave value is our next title is the biggest thing we've done for forever, I think, almost, or dating back to the Getaway. It's a big ambition, and that's a hugely exciting thing, but also mildly terrifying, and it definitely needs us to wear our brave pants. And I think the opportunity is, I talked earlier about just being so loving to see how the team has kind of developed and grew with the culture and become part of the culture. It's not Tara or myself stamping that down. It's a collaborative thing that comes from that team, and really seeing how that continues to grow and develop as we go through the various stages of development. Because I think we've got really feels like pretty solid foundations, and I'm really looking forward to us building on top of that.
I also think that hybrid mode that we're going for, that I said, is kind of like it's kind of a challenge in one way, but I think it leads into an opportunity, because I think our teams will be more diverse because of that as well, because the barriers are not there. Not all the same barriers are there.
Those are great. All right, last question for both of you. And I always love ending with a question like this, because there are a lot of people who listen who are thinking about getting into the industry or who are at the beginning of their careers in the industry. And the question is, if you have one piece of advice for anybody who is thinking about jumping into a leadership position for the first time, what would it be?
Good question. I'd say remember that everyone is different, and adapt your style to make others comfortable. Because then if you can do that, then people are going to come to you with their problems. And actually, as a leader, you need to understand what's going well, but also the challenges that people are facing, so that you can help tackle them.
And I'd say, we fundamentally work in quite a stressful industry, and that stress is born out of, just technology changes, new hardware, faster hardware, new control methodologies. It just, when you're pushing innovation, it makes it quite challenging. And I think, the amount of change that we work under is huge, and it's easy to get super stressed in that kind of environment. And I think, the one thing that I think on is, there are people that create safety systems for self-driving cars. There are people that create software for pacemakers. And at the end of the day, what we do is make games, and putting a bit of perspective on there, that it's not life and death. It's however stressed anybody on our team might feel at any one point, it is going to be okay. It's not like we're going to screw up and have a rocket blow up on the launch pad, right? It's not. We don't work in that. Thankfully, I'm glad, because that would be stressful. We don't work in that industry. But I think it's really easy to lose perspective of that, and I think it's always good to remind yourself that, video games are cool, but we make video games. So yeah.
I'm going to take that advice. That is fantastic. Thank you both so much for spending the time today. Tara, Stuart, it was awesome talking to you.
You
Really
too, Ted,
appreciate it.
always.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.